I'm Shayda, and in today's tutorial we're going to be talking about calligraphy inks and how to use them for your brush lettering. So let's get started. So to start today, I've got my inks set out, and the first one that I'll recommend is the Higgins Calligraphy Ink. It's a really good one for beginners, and it's a great one to go out and purchase and just get started with because it's quite watery and easy to use. And all of these inks, of course, are used for calligraphy, and we can do that calligraphy with the nib and pen that you see here. Now, I'm still practicing that. I don't think I'm quite ready to do a tutorial, but we'll get to that one day. But the nice thing about these inks is that you can use them with brushes, and you can do some beautiful brush and ink calligraphy, and it's not altogether different from the brush lettering that we've done with watercolor. But today I just want to introduce you to a few different inks and show you what they can do. Now we'll be using two different brushes. I like the Liquitex number 2 flat and the Liquitex number 1 round, but really any acrylic small flat or round brush will be your best friend for this project. And then I also have a little palette, a little craft palette that has some wells, just something for the ink to really sit and pool in will be perfect. The first ink that we're going to use is the Higgins Calligraphy Ink, and I'll just open it up here so that you guys can see it. It really is quite watery, and that's sort of a nice thing. It's not too viscous, it's not difficult to use, it's quite easy and goes on the paper and flows really nicely. And I'll just pour a little bit of it into my palette so that you guys can see what we're going to be working with. But this is a great one if you're just starting out with inks. It almost mimics watercolor, so if you've done some watercolor, this is a great one to branch out to. The only thing is that it sometimes goes on the page a little gray. It doesn't really dry a true black, and that bugs me sometimes. But this is my ultimate favorite ink. It's called Ace's Witch's Brew, and I'll link that in the description. I'll link all of these in the description below, but it gives you a beautiful true black. So I'll show you guys that one today as well. And then the third ink that we'll use is just this Bombay India Ink in blue. I don't want to get too into colored inks today, but I do sort of think of blue and black as our neutral ink colors. So those are the three that we're going to look at today, and I want to show you guys sort of the benefits of these different inks, and we'll try them out on a few different papers as well. When you're doing ink and brush calligraphy, you're going to want something that will stand up to the wet ink, so go with a cardstock, even better maybe a Bristol board on the matte side. I'll use watercolor paper in a 200 or 140 pound for at least one of these, and you guys can just sort of see the different papers in action. The first thing I'm going to do is just put down a piece of white cardstock, and I've got my number 1 round brush, and I'm using the Higgins Calligraphy Ink, and I'm just going to play around with it a little bit. The best thing you can do for yourself when you're doing brush and ink lettering is sort of to get relaxed and get really comfortable with the brush. So here I'm just practicing different strokes. As I've shown you before for brush lettering, you're going to use a heavy down stroke, especially if you're doing brush lettering calligraphy, and you're going to use sort of a very thin, light upstroke. So you want to practice different pressures and really see what the brush can do, and just really get comfortable with the ink and with the brush before you start working on a project. Once you've done a few different lines, you can branch out and start doing some spirals or some shapes. You can move on to do letters, so practice a few of the letters that might be in your poster or that maybe you just have trouble with. Here I'm just trying out a few different ones. When I do capital print, I'm not necessarily following along with the tenets of calligraphy style brush lettering. So here I'm just sort of practicing, okay, what can I do with this brush? How can I make these capital letter printed words look good? So here I'm going to actually start my piece. I've practiced a little, I've got a feel for the ink and the brush, and I've sort of warmed up into it. And I've written my little sentence, which I'm doing, don't worry, be happy. I've written that out on my cardstock. And so I'm just following along with my pencil lines and I'm going over them with my ink. And once you've written the words and got them centered on the page and you're feeling comfortable with the brush and with the ink, this project is going to come together really simply. So if you want help figuring out how to write out a quote, I have a video for that and I'll link that in the description below. But yeah, once you've got it written out and it's centered and you're feeling confident with the brush and the ink, I think these quotes or these pieces will come together really, really easily. So just have fun and try a few different quotes or words or letters. Now I'm going to show you guys another one. This is an example of using the brush and ink to do more of that like fake calligraphy or faux calligraphy or modern calligraphy, or even this would be an example of traditional brush lettering where we're doing that very thick downstroke and then the thin light upstroke. If you want more info about brush lettering, I've got a watercolor brush lettering tutorial and I'll link that in the description. And the ink brush lettering really isn't that much different. As you can see here, it's that thick, heavy downstroke and then the light, delicate upstroke. And I'm just writing out cultivate kindness, which I had written on my gray cardstock to begin with. So I've got some pencil lines that I am following and I'm using them as a guide. So I don't know if you can really see that in the video, but it is there. Not that you can't do this freehand, but it's nice to have your guide to help you through the piece, especially if you're new to brush lettering. So I'm just going to finish up my piece. And again, I'm using just the number 1 round brush for this. And you can see that Higgins Calligraphy Ink finishes a little bit light, a little bit watery. Now that's sort of on trend, but if you want to do something that's very dark, very true black, then I can't recommend enough this Ace's Witch's Brew. This one does not clean up with water, it cleans up with Varsol, and it can be a bit messy. You see I've got my gloves on here, but it's got a little blotter that you can use to put your ink in your palette. And then I'm going to go through and do another piece here. I've written out my quote in pencil very lightly on a piece of 200-pound cold pressed watercolor paper. So the difference with watercolor paper versus cardstock is going to be the texture. And watercolor paper, especially the cold pressed, has a very toothy, textured finish, and it's really nice, obviously for any liquidy paint like watercolor or a liquidy ink. So you'll find when you experiment with watercolor paper versus cardstock that I think you'll probably develop a preference. You might like the way the paint or ink settles into the texture and the creases of the watercolor paper, or you might prefer that really smooth finish that you get from the cardstock. So just try a few different papers and finishes and see what you prefer. And one thing I want to mention when it comes to doing your brush lettering with ink is that you never have to finish a letter in sort of one movement. So you can constantly go back to your palette and pick up more ink. You can just do the downstroke, get more ink, and then do the upstroke. Try to think of it as more like painting, not like printing. So we get so used to printing with our pen and we sort of develop a way of writing that is natural for us, but try to separate yourself from the act of printing or writing that you do every day when you make a grocery list, and try to think of this as more as painting. So each part of the letter becomes a stroke of the paintbrush, and you don't want to get stuck in sort of falling into the trap of doing cursive or printing where you're falling into your habits of writing. Treat it like a painting and treat each stroke or each part of the letter as a separate thing. And if you do that, I think you'll find you have quite a lot of success with your brush lettering. Now, if you're using the Ace's Witch's Brew, that cleans up with Varsol, not water, and you want to get your brushes in that Varsol or paint thinner right away because it is a brush killer. Here I'm just putting a little of my Bombay India ink into my palette. It's got a nice dropper. And then the first thing I'm going to do is just sort of use my blotting sheet here to test out the ink on the brush. As I showed in the first clip there, it's always a good idea to sort of get to know the ink and the brush first. And what I'm going to do now is just have a little bit of fun doing a freehand ink and brush lettering word. I'm just writing out the word love, so really simple. Here I've actually mixed just a little bit of water in with the ink, and you can see how I'm sort of treating it a bit like watercolor, where I'm able to go in and sort of add a little more ink inside each letter because it's very, very wet. And I think that looks really beautiful. Thank you so much for watching today, guys. I hope you're out there creating lots of artwork. I hope you're sharing your art on social media. Remember, you have a voice and art can change hearts and minds. I'll see you Friday with a new video.